Okay, so today we're going to talk about addressing children that are from a different not different, I should say, but a multicultural and are bilingual backgrounds. So are students that are different culturally as well as linguistically. So first we need to start out by defining what culture is. And culture is a complex system of beliefs, attitudes, and actions that shape the thoughts and behaviors of a group of people, that distinguish it from other people. So there are many, many cultures with different beliefs and attitudes and actions. So to understand culture in our society, we know that there's a dominant culture in the United States, even though we are becoming more demographically mixed, um, and that our value systems, our cultural elements deemed most important by our society and the dominant culture certainly have to do with independence and productivity. Um, so elements of culture then are values, and some cultures value individualism, and others value interdependence or group dependence. Behavior patterns may be different. There may be more competition in one culture versus another that's more sharing. Certainly, there's language differences and differences in relations to our perspectives and worldviews. There are additional key concepts to understand. Macroculture, that's the overarching cultural aspects of a society. Microculture, the subgroups having distinguishing characteristics within a society. So when we think of macro, we think large. So what are those overarching cultural aspects of a whole society? So we're an American society. And micro would be the differences among the different cultures or subgroups. Culture intertwines with race, right? We do still have racial isolation in this country, and we have complex relationships between culture and race, so that, for example, not all people of an Asian background have the same culture and even would consider themselves the same race, even though skin color may be more homogeneous. And same with black people, we know that we have um, black people that come from other countries, such as Jamaica, living in our country, and so their culture may be vastly different. There's a complex relationship that is impacted by many factors, and we should not then make assumptions about a family's culture based on their race. So when we bring all this into the school setting, we know that there is bias, okay, and bias meaning that there is a certain way we think things should be done, um, and we want to avoid that. So American schools largely are shaped by a white male perspective. White males were people who, pretty much started the education system, and a lot of the perspectives in terms of how we teach are still pervasive in terms of a white male perspective. Knowledge construction process is not generally studied in school, so we need to really need to be thinking about critical thinking and how children learn. And bias exists in both the curriculum and instructional materials, and we know that, for example, as to how many of us have been taught history, and we're really missing out on many truths that occurred within our history of the developing American country. There are different cognitive styles within different cultures. So, for example, we have cultures that might be more field independence versus field sensitive. Field independence would be people who think more analytically, focus on specifics and less on context, learn best in discrete incremental steps. So their independence, I guess I would say these are more of the detailed type people. Field sensitivity really look at things more holistically, and then they focus on broader concepts and learn best through hands-on, authentic tasks. So what happens when there's cultural dissonance, meaning that there's essentially a cultural mismatch? There could be academic challenges, there could be behavioral challenges. So, for example, field-sensitive students may perform poorly on lessons that focus on detail and step-by-step analytical thinking. And students from different cultures may be punished for behaviors that they exhibit in their culture that may be appropriate within their culture. Students may feel alienated and isolated as a result. We know that for certain cultures and races, there's an overrepresentation of those students in special education. And we have to be very careful about how we diagnose and label and refer children of different cultures to special education. We know that that certain groups are under-identified as well, so we may miss serving them in terms of what they may need in terms of their schooling. We also know that where children are placed within the least restrictive environment differs among certain groups in terms of culture. So that African American, Hispanic, and other non-Caucasian student groups with disabilities tend to be served in settings that are more restrictive or separate. So when we have these kinds of problems, when there's a disproportionate representation of certain cultures in certain settings, or more so in special education, we have problems with stigmatizing associated with the labels. Self-fulfilling prophecy, meaning a learned helplessness may build into certain cultures, and we have lower expectations of them potentially. Reduced interaction with typical peers may occur, and fewer opportunities to see typical academic and social behaviors. We also know that on the other end of the bell-shaped curve, the gifted students, we have certain populations that are underrepresented and certain populations that are overrepresented. For example, African American students are underrepresented and Asian students are overrepresented. So what contributes to this disproportionate number of students in special education? Poverty, increased exposure to lead, increased exposure to toxins in the environment, lack of prenatal care, and poor nutrition. Systemic racism, classism, systemic biases in curriculum instruction, teachers' attitudes, and the special education referral process. So what are some recommendations for addressing this disproportionate representation? Better teacher preparation for students becoming teachers. Improved behavior management strategies, making sure that we are being proactive and not reactive, and that we're positive in our approaches. Prevention and early intervention. Increased attention to possible racism, classism, biases in any kind of assessment. Increased family involvement. So when we refer students to special ed, we need to make sure that we are really looking at that pre-referral process and making sure that we've gone through response to intervention strategies before we refer. Alternative assessment strategies, making sure assessments are non-biased, and universal screening and early intervention for all. Promising practices then when we instruct children, making sure we're really applying differentiated instruction, making sure that we're tiering our lessons and that we're really focusing on the developmental level of the child. Using universal design for learning principles. So what that means is that we are presenting things in a number of different ways through sight and hearing and touch. Making sure that we understand multicultural education, content integration, knowledge construction, how to formalize our content, making sure that we understand whether or not we're prejudiced or biased in a certain way, and making sure that all schools have what they need. So, These are the main things that we need to address in multicultural education. When we talk about English language learners, we always need to make sure, obviously, that we have someone who is bilingual supporting that child, making sure that the child can access materials, making sure that that we also are respecting their language, allowing the child to use their language, of course, concurrently with English. So this is a little mnemonic device or strategy for remembering a framework to remember what we need to consider. We need to consider our instruction, method of instruction, our materials we use, the environment of our classrooms, the content of instruction, collaboration in instruction with the multidisciplinary team, and our assessment process. We need to make sure that we are, to the extent we possibly can, every way we can think of, involving parents of diverse learners. And that's both for us, but also for the family and the child. For us, we need to understand that we need to get rid of assumptions about families that are incorrect or inaccurate beliefs. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach because all families are different. And we need to understand that different cultures view disability differently. So beyond our some things that we need to be aware of, but that they're beyond our control, essentially, is certainly a family's preconceived ideas about school. Maybe they have a very negative idea about the school system, whether or not they live in poverty, and the stress they might be experiencing as a result of having a child with a disability. When we collaborate with parents, we want to make sure we understand their needs and their views. We want to make sure that we are talking about how we're going to collaborate, so have specific goals for collaboration. We want to make sure we're implementing activities to accomplish those goals. We want to make sure that we talk to them about how they feel about whether or not things are working, evaluate the process, and review the collaboration process. Some issues that affect working with diverse learners, certainly equity in education, standards and accountability movement, the response to intervention or RTI, school choice programs such as charter schools versus public, and teacher preparation. And that takes us through Chapter 3.